Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson, and this week on the show, we have a new guest I'm very excited to talk to. You will know her as the Bram Stoker-nominated author of dozens of short stories, poems, works of nonfiction, her novella, The Extra, and her new book, which is her debut short story collection, You Have to Let Them Bleed. It is available from Bad Hand Books on March 17th. Annie Neugebauer, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. It's great to talk to you. I was telling you before we started recording, I knew you by reputation, and I had probably read an odd short story here or there. But
Sure.
when I really got into your writing, it was because friend of the show, Clay McLeod Chapman, was talking to me over the last summer and said, have you read Annie Neugebauer's stuff? And I said, no. And he said, you got to go get her new story collection. It's so good. So I immediately emailed Doug Morano at Bad Hand and said, hey, I know it's early, but can you send me this? And he sent me a PDF. And I was blown away by this collection.
Thank you.
Now, I know that you have published many places short fiction prior to this collection. What was the process like, the selection process, and the sort of directive in your mind for what you wanted You Have to Let Them Bleed to be?
Good question. I guess I kind of think of it as a favorites compilation or like a, sort of best of what I've had out so far. So a lot of it was narrowing down. Um, and I picked there were some easy favorites, like personal favorites of mine, ones that I'm more proud of. And then those sort of set the stage for tone. And I was able to say, like, I love this story, but it's got a very different vibe than the bulk of these I've started. So then it was kind of just like making sure that they all sort of spoke to each other in some way or another, or did something that I was trying to do, like in general, so that there would be a feel of like cohesiveness to it.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely hold together. First of all, it's not just stories. There are some poems in here as well.
Right.
They hold together thematically, and I think the theme for me was just savage. Like I was so you write stories, and this is not to take away from people who sort of sidle around the corner and do things that are a little more implied than explicit, but like you go for the throat with these stories, and I love that.
Thank you.
These stories also range in length. There's a very broad spectrum of word counts here. You have some that are just a couple of pages and some that run much longer. How do you approach short fiction? Are you a person who has to have the entire story laid out in your head before you write it, or do you just sort of explore it?
Usually I explore it. For me, the variation on length is just sort of a byproduct of whatever idea I'm following. So, I'll get the seed idea for a story. A lot of times for me, the idea that catches my attention will be sort of a high concept, what if type of question. Like what if, I don't know, what if the color red goes missing? There's the story Redless in the collection. It was like, well, what
Yeah.
if what if an entire color just like stops existing, or at least for somebody? And so then I'll kind of flesh that concept out. Sometimes I'll have an idea in a sort of idea bank for a long time, and I know I want to do something with it, but I have to wait to see what else is needed to turn it into a true story and not just a concept. And other times I'll just go. I'll just start writing and see what happens. So the variation on length is really just sort of me trying my best to stay true to whatever I'm following. So sometimes I'll have an idea that I think, oh, I want to do this, and I'll get going, and the story is way shorter than I expected it to be, because when I hit that natural ending spot, I try to trust that, even if I expect it to go further. And I have a few like that. So Sings the Siren is one where I had no idea what plot was going to be happening in that story. I just had this concept of sirens sing when they're tortured, and I started writing it. And when I hit the ending, I was like, oh, well, that feels like the ending. So that's where I stopped it.
So we're going to talk about one specific story from the collection later when we get into our topic because it's very germane to our topic. Um,
Yeah.
but right now, I just kind of want to ask you this for like a case study of your process. One of
Yeah.
my favorite stories in the collection, and this is previously published. So if you haven't read it and you don't want to be spoiled, skip ahead 5 minutes and you'll be fine. But it's a story called What Throat, which is a shapeshifter story, I guess, is the easiest way to categorize.
Sure. Yeah, that works.
I tend to read before I fall asleep, and my wife always wonders, like, how can you read scary stories and then just go to sleep? And horror is my happy place, so that's
Yeah.
generally not an issue. But every once in a while, I come across a story that just really hits me, and What Throat kept me up for a good 2 hours longer than I was
Oh.
expecting to be up that night. Which I say in a totally complimentary way.
Oh
And it
yeah, that's
didn't.
like my favorite compliment. Thank you so much.
It's a story that involves one of my favorite horror devices in any kind of story, which is anytime you can have a character alone in a dark place and they hear a sound that they are not expecting to hear.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
it is one of the things that sends chills down my spine every time. So I just want to open this up to you and ask, how did that story take shape?
Hmm. Good question. That's an older one. Um, I think that I think that the beginning of that idea was the mimicry part. I think I had the idea of this whatever the scary thing is. Um, monster for lack of a better word. What if it could sound like literally anything? Um, and I was really drawn to the idea of being able to write something that sounded like perfectly like something else, but in that sort of uncanny valley way where the narrator and hopefully the reader can still feel that even though it's exact, it's not right. That was what drew me to that story. And I don't remember how I ended up combining the character lost in the woods and the group already at the cabin. But once I had those characters in play, it sort of came together um, on its own.
Yeah, it's a wonderful story. If listeners, if you are frightened by the bear scene in the Annihilation movie, you're gonna want to read What Throat.
Mm.
It falls into the same horror family in my head. Um,
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
but
that's cool.
transitioning a little bit to talk about your other work, because you have to let them bleed is coming out on March 17th. A few days
Yeah.
later,
Yeah.
Shortwave is reprinting your novella, The Extra, and
Right.
it is now billed as the first part in a series called The Outsider Sequence. So
That's right.
there will be a second book called The Other that is out in June, and the third book is called The Spare, and it is out about a month from now, or a month from now, a year
A
from
year.
now, a year from now.
I'm
March
not ready.
March what is time anymore? March
Oh, seriously.
2027 is when
Yeah.
the third book will be out. So for
Yeah.
listeners who may not know, what is the Outsider Sequence and how did it grow into a multi-book thing?
Yeah, so right now the Outsider sequence is basically a trilogy of novellas. It started with the extra. The extra is another one that came to me as a high concept idea first. The idea is that there's a group of 10 people on a backpacking trip, and then that first night when they set up camp, there are 11 people. But everybody remembers everybody else there, and so they have to try to figure out who is the extra. And that was the original idea for that one. And Shortwave picked that up, and the editor at Shortwave, Alan Listufka, at some point in our emails mentioned something sort of offhandedly about a sequel, uh, which at first I just kind of like moved past because I couldn't even imagine what a sequel would look like. Um, but then after I had finished whatever I was working on at the time, it jumped back into my head and I started being like, well, what would a follow-up to that look like? And I came up with the ideas for The Other and The Spare, which are not direct sequels to the extra. It's not the same set of characters, a continuation of the story. It is in the shared universe, um, and it is best read in order, which is why we ended up calling it a sequence because we wanted to convey that they go together and they should be, ideally read in order, but they're not traditional sequels.
Right.
So, yeah.
So yeah, I can't wait to see more of the Outsider sequence. How was since you're primarily known for shorter works, I have to ask, how was it working in a shared universe?
Really fun. It was really fun. Um, I also write novels. I don't have any novels published yet, but I am used to pretty much every length you can imagine. I write
Okay.
poetry, which is literally words short, and then I have some like pretty epic novels in my drawer. So um, it was interesting. For me, it was easier to stay in the shared universe. That part of it felt very much so just like staying true to my own concept of the vibe of the extra, um, and developing, some world building behind the scenes stuff. But for me, it was actually more unique to recreate a novella length work because I tended before these three to write either a short story or a whole novel. And the extra, I never intended it for it to be a novella length. Back when I drafted it originally, which was quite a long time ago now, novellas were not very sellable. Like people weren't generally buying novellas. They've had kind of a nice renaissance lately, which is great, great for me. But I thought, I thought it was going to be a short story, and then it insisted on a little bit more than I could handle in a short story, and so I was like, well, what am I gonna do with this? But I just let it be what it wanted to be, and eventually that turned out to be a great thing to have, obviously. But so the other and the spare, those were the first times that I ever set out to write something intentionally that sort of what I think of as an in-between length. So that was a learning experience for me, but I love it. I definitely would write more novellas. They're very fun.
I've said this before on the show, and I'll say it again to anyone who will listen, that novellas are the 80-minute horror movie of the book world. And
Yeah.
we absolutely, if you have not ever gotten into the wonderful world of horror novellas, go pick some up. You can start with the extra, uh, and keep going because they're great, and you can read them very quickly and have a lot
Yeah.
of fun and feel like you've just been given like a full meal of a story, which is great.
Yeah.
But now we're gonna move over to our topic today, which is the tales of Edgar Allan Poe. I think is what I'll call the episode because we Annie did not pick one. Annie said, "Can I talk about Poe in general, the larger oeuvre of Poe?" And I yes, absolutely, because very often you find all of his stuff in a single volume. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that totally works. I have at least two complete tales and poems of Poe around this house. Uh, this is our second Poe episode. We talked about the Telltale Heart a few months ago with Ali Malinenko.
Yeah, I
Um,
went and listened to that. It's a great episode.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. She has, if you haven't heard that, listener, she has an amazing story about the first time she heard the Telltale Heart, which
Yeah.
I can still picture in my mind. But for now, Annie, I want to ask you what you remember about your first exposure to Poe.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this obviously after I told you that's what I'd like, and I was trying to remember what was the actual first Poe that I ever read. And I'm certain that the first poem of his that I read was The Raven in
Hmm.
seventh grade English class.
Right.
But I'm also pretty sure that before then I read, and I would use read in air quotes because I was so young. I was probably in like, I guess maybe fifth or sixth grade. Um, I read The Pit and the Pendulum, I think, was my first one.
Ooh.
Yeah. I remember I still have it. There's this really, really old kind of falling apart hardback of Poe that my mom had on a bookshelf right outside my bedroom. It was like a built-in bookshelf in our hallway. And it was, it was like kid accessible stuff down low. And then up on the very, very top shelf is like some hardbacks that I guess was more decorative, but it included an Alfred Hitchcock anthology called Stories That Scared Even Me,
Yep.
and Poe, the collected works of Poe. And I probably could have chosen that Stories That Scared Even Me too for this, but I think the Poe has been more important to my like own personal taste.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I must have climbed up there and pulled that down without parental permission. And I remember reading it in my room by myself. And I remember quite vividly that it was mostly over my head as far as like vocabulary and context. Like it takes place during like the Spanish Inquisition, I think.
Yeah.
And there's some historical stuff that I just had no clue. I had no idea what any of that was supposed to reference. And I was definitely reading like just just kept going. Like I was like, I don't know what that means. Kept going. That I don't know. Skip that word. Context cues. Like try to figure it out. And it still landed for me. It still was just the most shocking, chilling, memorable experience of fear that I had experienced up to then in my life. Um, the the idea of this narrator waking up in the dark room, in the dark prison, like a prison cell or whatever you want to call it, torture chamber, like it being so dark that he literally can't see anything and he has to feel his way around, that has like become part of my DNA. Like that is like embedded in the core of me as far as like fear. It just struck me just right.
Yeah. That's a wild one to start with, like, because that
Yeah.
that thing is brutal. But like, I'm trying to think. You and I both went to Texas public schools, so I think we
Hmm.
both read The Raven in seventh grade. I
Yeah.
think the first short story that I remember reading is The Telltale Heart, and that,
I think in school, me too.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I know we read Annabelle Lee in school. We read The Gold Bug, and I know I have a very vivid memory of in like pre-AP English, so I was probably seventh or eighth grade, or ninth grade maybe, listening to an audio book version of The Cask of Amontillado, which
Oh, yeah.
was so effective. And even Poe is, like you said, there's a vocabulary adjustment. There is a,
Hmm.
you have to kind of wrap your brain around it, because it's not a writing style we have now necessarily. But once you kind of get the hang of where he's going, it just sinks into your bones. It's so incredible. I was
Yeah.
rereading. I was kind of going through the greatest hits, uh, before this interview, and I reread The Fall of the House of Usher, for
Hmm.
reasons that will become apparent very soon. And I was struck by how evocative it all is once you get your head around the way he plays with language. And
Hmm.
so going from that, what you said, that Poe is very important to your taste, and obviously you chose Poe for the show.
Yeah.
When did your like Poe fandom kick into high gear, where it was like, okay, I can follow this author now, I understand the prose and the meaning of all of this? When did that start to happen for you?
That was when we read The Raven. So, yeah. So, when I read The Pit and the Pendulum, it was on my own. It was half understood, but deeply felt. And there was something, I think, looking back on it, of course, there was something extra intriguing to me about the sort of denseness and inaccessibility of it. Like, the fact that I knew I didn't fully understand all that happened in that story might have made it even more appealing to me. Um, and then in seventh grade English, we studied The Raven. Like we didn't just read it, we studied it. I feel like we might have spent an entire week just on that poem. Like I remember it being the first truly in-depth analysis that I had ever participated in for literature. Like we had printouts with columns to the right of the poem, and like every difficult vocabulary word we looked up in a dictionary and wrote out the definition. Every sort of obscure allusion that a seventh grader would not know, we looked up in the encyclopedia and wrote out, like what, Nepenthe is, like these different references, like how the heck could you understand that poem all the way unless you had reference books beside you, So
Right,
we did
right.
that. Yeah. And then after doing that, we also spent, several classes discussing and, the teacher leading, shout out to Miss Riley, the teacher leading like discussion questions of like, what do you think this means? And why do you think he did this? And, that kind of stuff. And it was, it was I guess for me the like beginning of my love of um scholastic study of literature.
Yeah.
And it was like a key too, because after that, all of that study, all of that analysis, going back and reading the poem again, it becomes this living thing that you understand on a deep level that I never could have accessed if I had read it on my own, you know?
Yeah.
So it felt like somebody handing me the key to all these other stories of Poe's that I could then go back and read and start to, apply these things and do it on my own. It felt like um, handing me like the next phase of growing up. Here's how you access dense intellectual, creative material. And I mean, it felt like that she set my brain on fire. I was I was in
Yeah.
love.
Yeah, mine was Mrs. Burnson in pre-AP and AP English, and it was the same thing. It's amazing when you
Yeah.
have someone just kind of sit down and say, okay, we're going to go through every aspect of this and try to pull out all of the good stuff that you'll
Yeah.
be able to savor and that you can carry with you. Um, while I'm thinking about it, I want to ask, was Poe kind of your kickstart into writing your own poems?
Yes. And in fact, I still have somewhere in some sort of storage trunk the final project or whatever for that unit in the class. We got to choose what kind of, like some people memorized some stanzas of the Raven, and there were different, like, you could make a diorama of the Telltale Heart, or different things. And I chose to write and illustrate my own book of poetry inspired by Poe. And I think that was my first like little, horror poetry booklet, that I like illustrated with colored pencils and, printed out on my computer and
Were
turned in
you
for my final project.
Man, I would love to see a bunch of kids dioramas of the Telltale Heart.
Me
We
too.
we didn't have that as a project option
Oh,
at any
really?
point, but God, it would have been great doing a Cask of Amontillado diorama. Oh man, um, so many Poe stories would make great dioramas. So,
Yeah.
were you writing fiction of any kind before that project? Was that already in your
Yeah.
head?
Yeah. I was already writing poems and stories, or really probably more than stories at that point. I was writing like, um, more like first chapters of conceptual novels that I never finished, or sometimes little stories too. But I've always been drawn to that. Like from as soon as I was able to start like writing and talking, I was trying to do, that. But yeah, that was probably the first time that I like sat down to try to collect some pieces together into my own, miniature book.
So I think I maybe know the answer to this, but in terms of Poe's short fiction, what would you say? Do you have a favorite story?
That's such a that's a hard question. I
Well,
think that my favorite.
we can consider this a jumping off point to talk about as many stories as you want. So don't feel pressured to pick one.
Yeah. So a Telltale Heart is hard to beat. I
Mm,
mean, man, it is just a masterclass. Um, I also have a super, super deep love of Mask of the Red Death.
yeah.
Love that one. Of course, the Fall of the House of Usher um, is also a favorite of mine. Um, Cask of Amontillado is
Hmm.
great. I mean, pretty much all the highlights. Black Cat. I always felt like that one was a little bit underrated compared to the others, but I love Black Cat.
Black Cat is great. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and of course, Pit and the Pendulum. I feel like maybe those are sort of like my top, I don't know, was that like five maybe?
Your core Poe
Yeah, those are
stuff.
probably the core. Yeah.
I reread the Black Cat, which I probably hadn't read since freshman year of high school or something, and that thing is amazing. It's so the image of a cat framed in plaster on a wall is just so creepy. It's one of
Yeah.
those things like you almost don't want to fully imagine it because of what it would look like. But I had sort of the same thought as you because I was thinking I'm going to ask Annie if she has a favorite Poe story, and that led me to go, do I have a favorite Poe story? And I don't have one that I could single out as like that's the one because, but I do have a type of Poe story that I like best, which is
Yeah.
he is so great when he's writing about obsession
Hmm.
and the ways in which our brains warp reality around our obsessions. And it's really cool because you have the Telltale Heart, which is the sort of quintessential first person narration Poe story about a guy who becomes obsessed with a real or perceived threat.
Hmm.
Um, but then you have stuff like House of Usher, which is someone narrating someone else's obsession,
Right.
and the way that it changes not just that person, not just Roderick Usher, but the narrator, and the way it warps his reality, being around this man who is convinced that doom is coming for him.
Hmm.
Um, I love the way that Poe writes about those things. I love his asides. There are so many moments in his stories when he just sort of has the character go, "Now look, I know this. I
Yeah.
know this sounds completely insane, but
Yeah.
if you just hear me out, you're going to understand what I'm going through." Um, which is, yeah, that's a defining thing of the Telltale Heart, and it's so. Speaking more generally about Poe, what is it about his stories? What elements of his fiction stick with you the most?
I think I definitely agree with you about the obsession. He does that so well. I also think for me, there's there's a level of understanding fear that he brings to the page
Hmm.
that horror doesn't always tap into. You can write about dark and scary and gross things without necessarily understanding the emotion of fear. And I've always felt like Poe truly understands fear. And so he's able to get to the reader's fear in a way that, for me at least as a reader, is relatively rare. Um, I remember just being so truly and authentically unsettled, um, and not just shocked. He does shock sometimes too,
Yeah,
but it's not just like, ah, it's not just like, look at this blood, look at this thing, or how shocking is this concept. It's also like you get drawn into these different narrators and characters situations where I feel like I'm going along the ride with them, even if it's against my will, which I
yeah.
think is just so powerful.
Well, and now we have to talk about you replicate that feeling in a wonderful way in a story that's in You Have to Let Them Bleed, called "The Call of the House of Usher," which is about a novelist slash home restorer who like makes their money restoring homes, but wants to be a novelist, wants to be a writer.
Yeah.
And they get a mysterious message one day saying like, "Hey, you're a member of the House of Usher. You're the last of the line of the House of Usher. You have to go to this house and restore it."
Hmm.
and your narrator is like, I don't know what any of this is, but I feel this pull, like I
Hmm.
must go figure out this mystery. um as a fellow Poe fan, it feels very daunting to me, the idea of picking up the baton of that story in that location, and creating something new, especially when you consider that you are writing in a very Poe-like style in that
Right.
story. What is the origins of Call of the House of Usher for you?
Yeah. It's funny to hear you say it like that because I'm thinking like I should have been more daunted. Um, but so that one came about, the concept of the narrator sees this sort of ghostly, almost like a silhouette of a woman in the corner of their eye, whenever they blink.
Yes.
And that concept happened first. And I sort of quick drafted that as flash fiction. It was like maybe 1,000 words long. And I was unhappy with it. I love the concept of that, like, if you close your eyes, there's something there, so you open them and it's gone, but then it starts to like become more omnipresent to the point that even just blinking, you can see it, like in that moment of blinking. That part, I was like, I love that, but I wasn't happy with it being so short and just about that concept, just nothing but that. And then I came across a submission call for an anthology, of Poe inspired work that would, it was a charity anthology to support, the Poe House in Baltimore was like at risk of being shut down or something at that time. Um, and I thought, well, yeah, I mean, I'm like a number one Poe fan. Like, why wouldn't I try this? And so I took that idea and it just felt like a good fit with the House of Usher and the lineage, and like you said, the obsession, that Roderick, uh, deals with in that story, or is consumed by it, I guess. And as far as like being daunted by writing in a sort of Poe-esque style or playing in Poe's sandbox, it honestly never occurred to me to be daunted because, um, I guess I feel that this is might sound weird, but I feel like Poe is for me. Like yeah, he's for everybody. I don't mean it in a greedy way, but like when I read Poe, I'm like, I'm absolutely who he wrote this for when he was writing his work because of how much I appreciate it and love it. Like, what author doesn't want to be read by somebody who loves what they're doing that much? Like, that's who you're writing for. So it feels like it feels like it belongs to me in a way. And so it never occurred to me to be daunted. So I just did it and I had an absolute blast.
I mean, that's a great way to approach it, is just going, just like I said, your stories really go for it, and you do get a sense of the playful and of the, I'm just going to have fun with this concept, which is something I've talked about with so many writers on this show, uh, about short fiction, about the glory and the beauty of short fiction being a place for experimentation and play,
Yes.
where some of the pressure that you might feel with a novel or something like that is off, because it's like, well, if I write this over, a couple of days or whatever, then how much time have I really wasted if it doesn't turn out good,
Exactly. Exactly. There's a joy in trying something with a low commitment. And if I had written it and felt like I just did not do it justice, I wouldn't have sent it in. I would have just stuck it in my drawer and nobody ever would have seen it and nobody would have to know?
There's also a layer in it that I find, and I think this is a slight spoiler, so again, if you haven't read the story, the book's out on the 17th, skip ahead a few minutes and come back to us. um like I said, your narrator is a writer, and they go to the House of Usher, and it is basically, exactly as Roderick left it. It's, I mean, it's a ruin. It's fallen into further
Hmm.
disrepair, but the crack down the middle of the house is still there. Um,
Yeah.
there is still evidence of the previous story, having taken place in the house, that I won't give away because it's an amazing shock moment when you introduce that evidence. But something interesting happens, which is the more the narrator is in the house, the longer they spend there, the more easily they find that they're able to write.
Hmm.
Inspiration starts to come. And you do this wonderful thing by the end of it where you're sort of juxtaposing Roderick's obsession with the house coming apart with your narrator's obsession with figuring out how to finish their novel and realizing that it's they thought that they had it all figured out, but it's starting to come apart in their hands in sort
Hmm.
of the same way that Roderick's world came apart. Um,
Yeah.
I just find that so cool. Where do you remember what you were thinking about when that happened? Like when you realized you were, is that something you didn't realize you were doing until after the story was written, or was it an idea that occurred to you as you were going?
That was instinct. That was following instinct. Yeah, because I had I think I remember sort of having a concept of that ending, which I won't spoil, but I think I kind of knew where that ending was going to go. And then the part where the narrator is at the house was instinct. Like I had very recently read the short story, obviously, to refresh myself, and what I was doing. And yeah, the rest fleshing out that part in between where they get to the house and the ending that I knew, that was just following what my brain decided should happen.
Yeah, you have an incredible brain.
Thank you.
it's it's just such a it's such a cool story. I want to double back and ask a question that I enjoy talking about, which you were talking about quick drafting, flash fiction, and writing things out really quickly. Um,
Hmm.
is is speed an important component for you in the composition of short fiction? Because I know people who will take weeks to write a short story, but
Hmm.
I've also talked to writers, and I'm the same way too. Like if I take too long with a short story, it starts to go down the tubes. If I stick with it and grind it out really quickly, it tends to
Yeah.
hold together better.
Yeah, I do think speed helps me. And even with longer, like I fast draft my novels as well. Obviously it takes longer to fast draft them, but I guess I do sort of think of it as outrunning my own doubts
Yeah,
or censoring, like I don't want to I don't want my intellectual concerns or worries or perceptions to muddle up the good, like deep brain emotional work that happens when you just let your creativity go. So for me, fast drafting is, I think, part of that. I think I just want to get it all out the way it feels like it should be out, and then I can go back and take care and see what I agree with and don't agree with, and how I can improve it and stuff. But yeah, the speed of it is like a trick for me. It's like a trick to get out of my own way.
yeah. I think the most successful short story I've ever written, which I'll have an announcement coming soon, listeners, about that story, was one I wrote in an afternoon rather than
Yeah.
like taking however long weeks or whatever to figure something out. So,
Yeah.
because I'm a process nerd, I have to follow up on this. You said fast draft,
Hmm.
and I feel like every writer has their own version of what that means, what something like that means. What does fast draft mean for you?
For me, it means finding long pockets of like flow state drafting where um I'm not letting myself stop to do research. I'm not letting myself stop to plot. Um and if it's a long enough piece that it takes more than one like session, like some of the shorter ones, like you said with yours, I'll write those in one writing session. I'll just
Yeah.
sit down and they pour out and that's it. If it's a piece that's long enough that I can't do that, or if I'm interrupted, I need to hold it in creatively. Like I don't allow myself to like talk out loud about what I'm going to finish, how I'm going to finish it, or like I don't want to release that pressure. You know, it's like a pressure valve that like I want to get that story out, and I don't want to accidentally talk out the ending with, you know, my husband or my friend or somebody and lose that sense of like urgency, like it's still stuck there and I want to go back the next time I can and finish it, you know?
Yeah. Does your
So, yeah, for
husband
me it's sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, you go ahead and wrap up and then I'll ask my next question. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, and I was just gonna say for me it's less about like the speed of typing, although I tend to also be a like I don't know, moderate to fast like typist. It's less about the actual like speed and more about like the uninterrupted focus of it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, does your husband enjoy horror stories or no?
No. He does not. And in fact, it's a running joke for us that like when I give him something I've drafted, if he is uncomfortable and like almost mad at me for a little while, I know I've like nailed it.
Yeah, yeah. My wife is the same way. She does not read most of the fiction I write. She reads a lot of the nonfiction, and she edits the show. Hi, honey. She edits the show, so she hears all of these guests that I have
Yeah.
talking about their stories and the things that they're into, and so she's heard some horrible things, but it has not made her a horror fan yet. We'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see if we can eventually get her on board.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I have to ask, since we're talking about House of Usher so much,
Mhm.
did you watch the Mike Flanagan Fall of the House of Usher series on
I
Netflix?
did. Yeah. I love Mike Flanagan's series. I would say that that one was not my favorite of his, but that I still very much enjoyed it. It was
Yeah,
very fun.
same.
Yeah.
I prefer the two Haunting series, and
Yeah.
I think Midnight Mass is probably better, but I don't have as much of a fondness for that one just because of the thematic elements of it. But
Yeah. Same.
House of Usher, or as I call it, Horror Succession,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
a banger. It's so great. I love the
It's
way
fun.
he remixed all of the Poe elements in that.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite Poe adaptations you want to shout out before we?
Hmm. I don't, interestingly. I think that I'm definitely a person who's less likely to be on board with adaptations in general, because when I read them, I picture it so vividly that inevitably it doesn't match what I've done in my head. And so I always feel like a little bit disappointed that it's not just my imagination
Hmm.
made real, you know?
Well, and so many Poe adaptations aren't really adaptations at all. If you
Yeah.
think about the most famous like Poe films, which are the the Black Cat from the 30s, which has nothing to
Hmm.
do with the story,
Right.
and then the Roger Corman films that Vincent Price did, like
Yeah.
they have elements of the stories, but they're not really adaptations. They're just kind of new things that they slapped that
Yeah.
title on.
Yeah, they took like an idea from it and the sort of general flavor of gothic horror, and then they just like did a thing.
I will say that the Tomb of Lygia is an amazing movie, though. I love that movie a lot.
I
Um,
haven't seen that one.
Oh, it's a really cool Vincent Price one that has some amazing shocks in it. Um,
Okay.
but anyway, uh, one other thing I kind of wanted to mention that has only really sunk in for me in the last maybe 5 years about Poe is we are introduced in grade school to Poe as this sort of raving madman who
Yeah.
happened to create cohesive poems and stories of literary merit. And
Right.
that is because if I imagine most of my listeners know this, that when Poe died, a fellow a person who ran in the same literary circles as him, who did not
Mhm.
like him, uh, wrote first an obituary and then an entire an introduction to his complete works, and then I think an entire biography was built on these ideas that Poe was a drug addict and a drunk
Mhm.
who was just a complete lunatic and would walk around Baltimore babbling to himself in the streets all the time,
Right.
and that was not true. Those were complete fabrications, and I think that pokes some holes in the mystique of Poe because we
Yeah.
tend to think of him as this sort of dark dreamer who wasn't long for
Hmm.
this world. But
Yeah.
knowing that now, like it evolves my view of him into a much more sophisticated thing where like he was a guy who wanted to be a writer, and he wrote pages and pages and pages. He was constantly writing book reviews, essays,
Yeah.
short stories, poems. He was a
Yeah.
driven man. um how do you, as yeah, you said, like, Poe is for me,
Yeah.
how do you view Poe's legacy in like the context of 2020's horror fiction?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. I I do feel some sort of annoyance, I guess, at this at the it's still to this day
Hmm.
pervading, it was like a, I don't know, a smear campaign, basically.
Yeah.
Um, and there are still people that just, don't care a whole lot to like check that out because, why would they if Poe's not like a passion or whatever? And just have this, there's a feeling of like injustice in that to me. Um, and there's also like almost the opposite variation of like this glamorization of him as this sort of like haunted, depressive, poetic, like almost waifish, like gothic icon. Um, which I mean, don't get me wrong, like I have an art print of Poe's, sort of like iconic face and stuff too. Like it's beautiful, but it also feels sort of erasing to me of him as a person, um, as an author and a poet. Like I would absolutely put Poe, the real life human being, in my top three people I would have dinner with, dead and alive.
Hmm.
Like I would love to just talk to the actual human being, Edgar Allan Poe, It'd be,
Yes.
yeah,
Maybe one day in the great beyond we'll get to see him, and
maybe.
he'll tell us who the Poe toaster was. um
Yeah.
I so the last question, are you the Poe toaster?
No, I'm not the Poe toaster.
Ah, that's exactly what the Poe toaster would
I
say
know
then.
it
um
is.
So, our guest has been Annie Neugebauer. Her debut short story collection, You Have to Let Them Bleed, is out March 17th. The second edition of The Extra from Shortwave is out March 24th. Annie, before we let you go, will you let the people know where they can find you online?
I am Annie Neugebauer on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Blue Sky. And that's pretty much it these days. I try to minimize the social media number of apps. I think I'd say Instagram is probably where you'll find me most active.
I will also shout out annieneugebauer.com, which
Oh,
is
yes.
we will link to in the show notes, where you have a very comprehensive bibliography of all your stuff, as well as a blog where you update with publishing news. So everyone head over there and bookmark
Yeah.
all of Annie's stuff.
Thank
Our
you.
guest has been Annie Neugebauer. Annie, thank you so much for being on the show. It was great talking to you.
It was really fun. Thank you.
Thanks once again to Annie Neugebauer for being on the show. You Have to Let Them Bleed is available March 17th from our friends at Bad Hand Books. Go give Annie a follow on all of her socials and keep track of everything that she has coming up. And if you want to keep track of everything that we have going on, the best way to do that is to follow us on Blue Sky. We are at scareshapedus.bsky.social over there. We are also the Scares That Shaped Us on Facebook, and we are the Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube. If you prefer to listen to your podcasts over there, like, subscribe. We appreciate the support. If you like the show, please tell your friends. We had some very kind people in the horror community over the past couple of weeks shout out the show, bring some more listeners in, and I'm deeply appreciative to them, particularly Stina Marie and Paul Jessup, for their support and praise of everything we do over here. So yeah, if you want to let people know that you're enjoying the show, please do that. And if you have the time and the interest, head over to the podcasting platform of your choice and leave us a 5-star review so we can get featured and get even more listeners to keep doing this show that I love so much. We also have a newsletter. You can head to MatthewJacksonWrites.com and put in your email address, and you will get lots of free writing on the horror genre from me, as well as announcements. When we have announcements to make, I've got a couple of cool things coming up that I can't talk about yet, but I will write about them in the newsletter when I am able, as well as some upcoming new book reviews, film reviews. I'm going to start a new essay series over there very shortly. All of that at MatthewJacksonWrites.com. We appreciate you signing up over there to get all of that cool stuff. That's it for us this week. We will be back in 2 weeks on March 17th with a brand new episode. I am recording the interview with that guest later today, so we will be able to announce that very, very soon. And we've got some other really cool stuff coming up in April as well. And hopefully by May, we will be back up to our weekly cadence. We will have moved into our new house by then, and I will have my office set up and get some new episodes recorded, and we'll be back up to every Wednesday. We appreciate everyone bearing with us as we make this transition into a new house. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.